How are you?
Hey, oh, I've had a weird hot flash in the morning and I feel lots of feelings today. So it's interesting. I think there was one other time where I felt that way when we were supposed to be having a podcast conversation. So I don't feel those, I think this is menopause, that kind of ups and down kind of stuff very often. And also reminds me of what it would be like to feel the big feelings and have kids running around saying, Mom, can you get me another? Or Mom, she hit me. I can see it on your face. You're like,
Yeah. I about to start hitting the perimenopause world. 39. In 1 month, I'll be 39.
is that right?
Yeah.
Very exciting. Everybody is
So,
almost 40 in my world. That is really wild to me. So how does it feel?
like, where has the time gone?
Yeah.
Physically, I don't feel too different yet. If anything, it makes me a little nervous because back when I was having hormone issues about, 7 years ago now, when I was having other health problems. And so I know I guess a little bit of what it feels like. So I brace myself.
Yeah.
But also,
Yeah.
it helps to know, okay, I've experienced some of this before. So if I start to need some support, then I can look for that before things go. And my husband as well, right? Because he remembers.
Yeah. It's a funny thing because perimenopause is like PMS, but without a notification. It's like, boom, there I am. And the experience of it is it feels like adolescence plus PMS. It was there. Apparently, it's a reordering of the brain. This is an early adolescent,
Yeah.
and it feels evaluate everything. And then all of a sudden, you got a hot flash. And then you're like, no, I'm just totally fine. It's actually, I have things pretty, I think, dialed in. I felt pretty healthy, but every once in a while, it's like, boom, out of nowhere. And so learning how to regulate, co-regulate, or learning how to experience your emotions and know what to do with it or distance your emotions or really have clarity on what your thought patterns are helps a lot. It's almost like you need the preamble practice before you get into that phase. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Things do I know that Teresa speaks really well on that you can add to the depth of the conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the boundaries, especially when we talk about sensory-based self-care,
Yeah.
is understanding what that practically to be able to have the time and or make the time. It fits in really well with that, as well as the conflict.
Yeah.
Because I thought about you this week as how that, so much of how we handle that depends on how we can actually handle all of that sensory information that's coming at us as moms.
Absolutely.
And I'm with you having older kid and been there. I love tapping into your wisdom with that because my kids are getting older and the conflicts are looking different. It's not just about who had the pony first anymore. It's different layers.
And you're
So
talking about My Little Ponies, right?
yes, exactly.
Yes. Were they your little ponies way back in the day?
No, no.
No.
Although old My Little Ponies, in my opinion, are much cuter
Oh, is that
than
right?
the new ones. Yeah.
I haven't seen the new ones. But yeah, okay, let's definitely talk about that. So I'm so glad we finally got this conversation, you and I, because this took a little bit to achieve. And as with all homeschool moms, people are busy, but you have this added bonus of having a coaching business. You're building your own coaching business based on your own background as an OT. And so I want to share a little bit about that in a moment. But initially, when we first met, you described yourself as an overstimulated mom who became a sensory savvy mom. Can you walk through that journey? Share with us what the turning points were for you emotionally, practically, and in any way that would be applicable to another homeschool mom?
Definitely. I love that question because it's so helpful to look back and reflect on my experience and
Yeah.
see where I've come. So I look back and there's only two really pivotal moments that stand out in my memory. Mainly, it's a gradual realization, especially as my children got older, of realizing that motherhood wasn't getting easier. Surprise. And I knew people said that, but experiencing that myself as things got louder and more chaotic in my life. And as I realized that when we moved away from having a very readily available support system
Yeah.
to having nothing. and COVID happened. And it was a very challenging experience for me,
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, as it was for so many people for reasons. But
Yeah.
on top of that, relocating and not really
Mhm.
having the skill set for myself to have developed that support system, I was really floundering to
Yeah.
figure out how can we get through the day to day with 4 kids who at the time were ages 1 through 6.
Oh, were
Yeah.
you just that little when we first
Yeah.
met? That's
Um,
wild.
So having no support system and realizing thinking what is going on, and having a child in particular who I knew was struggling with her sensory processing.
Right.
And as a trained OT, I knew that. And I knew things I could do to help this child,
Mm,
but none of them were working.
right.
She didn't want to hear any of them.
Yeah.
And from not having any sleep at night, all of these other
Yes.
complications, it was a mess. I was a mess. And it took me a few years to really realize that this child was not receptive to what I was trying to offer
Mm,
because I was not first figuring out what was going on with myself. I was unable to co regulate with this child because I could not self regulate. And it turns out I know I was a highly sensitive person. I am a highly sensitive person. I have been my whole life. And when you're a young adult or if you're newly married, generally within reason, you can kind of work around that in your own
yeah.
environment. But
Yeah.
then when you share that with 4 people who don't really even have a concept of others
Mhm.
with the little children, it was very difficult. So I started to realize, wait a second, I know why I'm having a hard time. You don't outgrow these needs. I know that professionally, right? That certain neurotypes are the way they are, but I had forgotten that when I became a mom. My
Yes.
children
Mhm.
reminded me very, very quickly. And it just took a while for me to realize what that. The two memories that do stand out very clearly, though, is one. I remember being a turning point is when I started using an emoji chart that I printed for my kids to help
Oh.
with their emotional regulation. Of
Mm.
course, they weren't having it, especially that child in particular. But when I started using it for myself
Yeah.
and seeing what a big difference that was making for this child in particular and our whole family dynamic. And as well, one particular time when I was recovering from a meltdown with this child. And so when I say meltdowns, these would last, our whole day would be thrown off. This wasn't like I didn't get the right Cheerios sort of moment.
Yeah.
Impacts the whole family dynamic. And I was just honest with this child in an age appropriate way. And instead of feeling like I needed to have it all together, we cried together. I cried with this child, not from a place of frustration, but just a true, I want to help you and I'm frustrated and you're frustrated and
Yeah.
let's just be in this together. And I feel like that was really one of the first times that I remember, I would say, effectively co-regulating with this child. It's just being in those moments together. So
Yeah.
it's certainly a journey, but those moments and over time, over the course of probably 4 to 5 years, starting that journey of meeting my own needs as a highly sensitive person and thus helping the whole family because I am able to have effective ways of caring for myself.
Yeah. It's wild how when we start to take care of ourselves or we develop a relationship with ourselves, that things start to fall into place a little bit more. Not perfectly, because we're all humans and we're all wild cards in a way, but we have such a big impact on what's going on in the home. Just like Charlotte Mason says, "Oh, what is it that mom, you should go out to play? You need to go out to play." Something like
Yeah,
that.
if we could just do for ourselves what we
That's
ask our
right.
children to do. Yeah.
Yes. And somehow when we move into that motherhood role, we take on this persona that is very like super mom or is godlike. And we want to do everything for our kids. And we already know that it's not possible, or some of us know. Some of us don't know that going in. But when we are in it, we just assume we want to do all the things, but we can't do everything for everybody. And also remember that we actually have needs, that we're humans too.
Think a lot of it is almost a blindness. I think we may not realize we're thinking that, but it's
Right.
just the assumption that we don't realize until we wake up one day and realize that things are not as they should be.
That's right. It feels a little bit too hard. Yeah. And so you said that your puzzle pieces were partly the emoji chart and partly having a good cry alongside your
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah.
So each of those things were you identifying your emotions, would you say, the emoji chart? And then the cry is like accepting your reality, accepting that this isn't easy. I don't know how to engage with you, but I really want to. And I care about your emotions and your feelings too.
Yes, yes. Those are 2 just really core memories along my journey that stand out. And the
Yeah.
more I've had these conversations with other moms, I realize that I'm certainly not alone in this and that just not
No.
enough people are talking about are not talk people
Yes.
aren't talking about
Agreed.
it, right?
I certainly am. And I'm on the other side of it now where I can see you are unusual if you're not experiencing these things. Somehow we have this socialized experience as mothers that we shouldn't be talking about how hard it is or why we're frustrated about things or what's not working. But it would be really useful if we talked amongst each other so that we could encourage each other. I remember that you shared how, like, when we first met, you were talking about moving toward a more child led or child inspired learning. Don't remember which phrase you used, but can you describe how the shift from you're more focused on a Charlotte Mason type homeschool, and then you were wanting to move toward a more child inspired homeschool? How does that show up in your day to day homeschool life? And what changed for your family?
Yeah, so it's so neat to reflect back on that and think of it was actually one child that drove my initial interest in that, and it wasn't long before I realized that it was another child who really was basically demanding that. And since it has certainly impacted how I educate all the kids, but especially one child in particular. And yeah, it looks, I think first I just started realizing, wait a second, we're already doing a lot of this. And it's really a mindset shift of going
Yes.
from making it an afterthought to a priority. So I realized that a lot of our energy was going toward other things, and then the child led things would happen after you do XYZ. And it was sending a message to my kids that, okay, we'll do what you want to do, but first we need to do what I think is important. And I won't say that we are 100% child led, right? There are
Right.
certain things that I still value and I think are important for my kids to learn, but it's impacted our relationship and how they show up for our lessons every day because I feel like they actually feel like their interests aren't an afterthought anymore.
Said, yes. That is exactly why I don't suggest unschooling or encourage people in one particular method because they're homeschooling a child right in front of them. That's it. The child in front of you, or 4 or 12 or 1, but it is just one specific child. And also, you want to incorporate certain things into their education. You want to discuss certain things. Different families value different things, but you want to discuss certain things. You want them to know certain things. And so I hear that on repeat from a lot of different moms. And of course, there are the unschooling advocates that will say it needs to be entirely child led. And it typically is not most homeschool moms' perspective that it needs to be entirely child led. But just as you said, when their interests aren't an afterthought, then they actually feel like they have more autonomy and they're also more present and more engaged when you are bringing something to them.
I really just had to realize I had to make a choice at some point because there are only 24 hours of the day. I
That's
know that
right. Yeah.
we did a time audit together and that was super helpful because
Yeah.
if I really think that their interests are important and I want to prioritize that and just instead of just being like, well, after school, go do what you want to do, then realistically, actually, something is going to have to get cut, right?
Something needs to get cut.
Yeah.
Exactly. I still have an entire room full of curriculum. I still have loads of things that I wished I had done. Now I'm just counting on grandkids. And reality is you just don't have all the time in the world to do everything. You just don't.
That's so true. I think that I also started to realize that the things that my children really remembered the most, the things that really lit them up were things that were self-driven. And
Yes.
so if that was what was going to bring that and help their retention and help them really want to be those lifelong learners that we
Yeah.
want our kids to be,
Yeah.
then why don't I incorporate more of that into the most valuable part of our day?
So it's interesting you say that because I don't know what you would describe as your experience, but I know mine and I know my husband's intimately. And we both speak about our early childhood, our public school, or I had Catholic and Christian school as well. all the different schooled experiences that we had, we were taught certain things. And sometimes in various classrooms, we like certain educational tidbits, but sometimes and many times we didn't care. Or else, so in my husband's perspective, not mine, he saw that they weren't doing a service to certain historical periods, or they weren't really doing a deep dive on certain things, but he would do them after school. And so he remembers the things that he was most likely to learn or really know deeply, they weren't in school. They weren't even prompted by a school discussion. He was doing it outside of school already. And I know from experience, though, in my own experience, that the things that really mattered to me then were the things that mattered to me outside the classroom, as well as occasionally some things within the classroom, but mostly not. The things that I cared about, I kept all the way through from childhood to adulthood. And that wasn't primarily in a classroom.
Yes, you just really never know what will resonate with the
That's right.
child. And I think just really spreading the feast before the child and letting them
Yes.
see what
That's
resonates
right.
with them and letting them contribute to what actually gets put on the table is really important.
Very important. Yeah, in the beginning of the year, we would go to these curriculum vendor halls and we would all look at everything. And then in the beginning, when we first did this, the kids would choose what they wanted. And of course, didn't want to finish by the end of the year. But it helped them own it a little bit so that by the end of the year, they knew what they didn't want to do and how they didn't want to do it. So they were more engaged in it. And I see them still to this day because we've progressively, I'd say, deschooled and moved away from conventional approaches to education. I see now that they're very intentional about what they choose or don't choose in their lives. And I think that's the point for me, anyways. The benefit of an education is that it's intentional, it's purposeful, it means something to the person that is actually engaging it.
Yes. Yes. That's the beauty of the opportunities that we have as homeschoolers.
That's right. Except we don't always wield it. That's
That's
what I've
so
learned.
true.
Yeah.
So true. We feel guilty when we do.
Yes, yes. We should definitely go into a conversation about guilt sometime. False guilt and true guilt. I remember you sharing early on that you had discovered that there were certain goals that you had that you didn't know you had when we first met, that you had this notion of wanting to serve and do something outside of your mom role. What do you think now, looking back a couple of years, what was it that you wanted to allow to rise in your life?
I think that in some ways I was trying to put homeschooling in a place that it didn't belong. I was trying to, without really realizing it, putting a lot of time and energy in making that part of who I was instead of just being a person who homeschools my kids. I was a homeschool mom. And it's a lot shorter to say homeschool. Maybe that's why most of us say it. But I think that there was a lot of that, a lot of truth to how I would have described myself. And I just really started to realize this is not fulfilling me. I think it has a place in my life, but it is not my life. I love helping people and people who aren't related to me. That would be great. So especially coming from being an OT and missing that, and also
Mm,
coming to a place of realizing the positive impact. Really, I would not continue, I would not be homeschooling right now if I hadn't started to make that transition to realize how I could be more of myself. And I
yeah,
think that's why we started working together actually, Teresa, was I realized that if I couldn't figure out a way to help people while homeschooling as well, then I would have to stop homeschooling because it was that important to me to figure out a way to melt both of these things together. So yeah, I just realizing that's just part of my God-given identity is being a helper. And coaching has allowed me to bring my experience as both a professional and a mom who's been through, some interesting things with my kids and seeing what a difference that having that nervous system education and lens has made in my home.
that's interesting because way back in the day, I would not have identified with this conversation right here. I would have said, being a mom is enough. And if anyone listening says being mom is enough, then great, fabulous, wonderful. Because I was there for many years too, but then it transitioned at a certain point for me where I too felt like I want something else. I want to feel like a separate sense of self or a different identity. I want my own identity outside of this saturated mom role. And I absolutely loved it. So don't get me wrong. I appreciated it deeply. And now I definitely see what a remarkable experience it's been being a full-time mom in the home with my kids, but also educating them. I loved it. But I would not have related early on that I would need separate time. And yet, not too long into homeschooling, it felt like this is so much. There's so much energy. This, just as you share, touched out, talked out. What is it that we came up with in the beginning?
Yeah, touched out and talked out moms trying to
Yeah,
help find
yes, and
connection
so
and
true.
freedom in the middle of all that.
I think I just wanted to think two thoughts consecutively. Wanted to go to the bathroom without being interrupted. All the basic fundamental human things, and I absolutely loved all the memories, and yet I needed separate space, and when I went to a cafe on a Wednesday evening to write and didn't know that it had any intention toward a business, it just fueled me, and it gave me the fuel to do the thing with my kids. So that was
Yeah.
the beauty of it.
I've had interesting conversations with moms about homeschooling. There's two strong reactions I feel like to homeschooling. When someone doesn't homeschool, right?
Yeah,
Often I hear, I could never do that.
yeah.
And then I hear, I couldn't do that. And I used to have this feeling of, "Well, what do you think I am?" I'm certainly not certainly if you could be a fly on the wall in my home for an hour, you would see the reality.
Yep.
But also, I realized I started having this sense of jealousy in a way
Mhm.
because the moms who were saying that had a firm sense of a boundary of that's not part of who I am, or this, they had such like a strong sense of self to
Ah,
be that assertive
yeah.
about it. So I kind of started changing how I saw the response. But at the same time, it breaks my heart a little bit for the moms that say, "I would homeschool or I would like to homeschool, but I
Right.
couldn't." And a lot of those moms are moms that I feel would really benefit from understanding their nervous system and understanding how to meet their needs so that if they wanted to and were able, they could make it work.
I thought you were gonna say that moms say that I'm not patient enough because that's
Yes.
what I've heard a lot, and I'm like, "Oh, is that prerequisite? Because we have a problem."
I'm fired.
Yes, I'm fired. Yeah. Do I look that patient? And maybe I do because 'cause we're in public. But yes, certainly that element is something that you focus on in coaching, which overlaps with a lot of conversations I have with moms because they say things like, "I am losing my marbles all the time," or "It makes me crazy how the energy is always fighting," or "Kids don't wanna do anything. They're not motivated. They just wanna be on their screens," or "There's disharmony. There's a lack of peace in the home." And it starts with us. That's essentially what I hear from what your work, your podcast, your coaching is that it starts with us, our self-regulation, and our sense of strong self, how we can be compassionate toward ourselves. And if the listener is actually like us in that we have seasons where we just get completely absorbed in kid energy and responsibilities toward our kids, we forget us. We completely forget us. And so there's a constant barrage of emotions and needs and squabbling and all the things that we actually forget to be at peace within ourselves or to address our own needs.
Yeah, I think figuring out what those needs are is really important because we could make some blanket statements, some generalizations. For some of us, especially if we have sensory processing differences, those needs can be really different from other people's.
Yes.
And sometimes it's easy to get so wrapped up in what's going on around us because those external senses are firing and doing their job. But there's a whole set of senses inside our body that we're just not tapping into as moms and as adults in most of our societies. We're pretty sedentary, or at best we're on our feet back and forth grabbing stuff for kids or doing laundry. And all of the senses that would help us in those moments
Mm.
are just actually being understimulated, and instead we're just being pulled one direction or the other. I'll never forget, Teresa, when I walked by the mirror one day when I had littles, and I thought there was another person in my house. I had
Mhm.
forgotten that I had a body,
I have heard
and it
that.
just was so
Yes,
distracting to me.
yes. I remember Sarah Mackenzie from Read Aloud Revival saying the exact same thing. She said, "I forgot what I look like. I forgot that I had a different, like a separate sense of experience than my kids." And I don't know if it's really just a mom thing or if it's certain personalities are drawn into homeschooling. I don't think there is just one Enneagram type in homeschooling or one
Yeah.
type of personality, but we tend to be absorbers of our kids and the emotions in our family. And so the wild coincidence is this is probably not a healthy choice to move in to a space that is requiring us to address all these emotions and these voices. But on the other hand, maybe it's exactly what we need to
Yes.
personally grow.
100%. You said that so, Teresa. I really feel like you hit the nail on the head there, because if there was such thing as here comes the sciencey part of me, a population sample where we could just figure out with homeschool moms, how many of us are highly sensitive people, I think it would be a lot of us, because we end up being drawn to this because we see our kids' needs and think that child would really thrive best in
Yeah.
this setting. So then we choose this life, and then we get into it and realize this is the
A lot.
it's degrading.
Yes.
It's not life-giving for me, it's draining, and we'll keep going. A lot of us will just keep going and keep going until when?
Yes.
We're on a bottomless source here. At some point, we're going to hit a burnout phase, and that's not ideal for our kids or us, and yeah, that sort of we become martyrs without realizing what's going on.
I obviously don't have a randomized control trial, but I would suggest to you that at least the gals that come hang out with me, there is a tendency toward a highly sensitive person or the characteristics of a highly sensitive person. So I do find that intriguing. Perhaps it's just like our subconscious way of trying to learn or grow in a certain way. And it is a wonderful opportunity for us for personal growth. As much as it was very saturating, it was also really beautiful. There were so many moments that you could share with your kids along the way. And it wasn't just rabbit trails that we were encouraging for our kids, it was also our own rabbit trails. And so then even you have moved into a coaching space alongside your homeschool experience. And what does that do for you to work with another mom or another woman, not necessarily a mom, but another woman to support her?
It really lights me up, first of all.
Yeah.
I live for that helper's high, I feel like,
Yes.
of truly connecting with
Yeah.
another person and helping them find out what's important to them and how to make that happen. It's helped my relationship with my kids because
Yeah.
it's helped me feel like I am my own person, and they
Right.
see mom has her own thing. And again, certainly not that every homeschool mom has to have a business or other things, but I think it has forced me to grow in ways that otherwise I would not have chosen. Figuring out how to grow a business, how to do all of these other things that demands of us, and how to be okay with being uncomfortable. Because I
Yeah.
feel like it's really easy as homeschool moms who can curate our environment and our schedules to stay comfortable
Mhm.
and until our kids push us in other
Yeah.
ways, and but still to a certain extent that's not necessarily demanding of our own personal growth. So I feel like it has been really helpful for my own personal growth.
If I track back in our conversation and go back to that conversation about the mirror, I actually remember you saying that in coaching, I was acting as your immovable mirror and I wouldn't move. It was a kind of presence that helped you realize what was really going on for you so that you could take action in your own life instead of me being an advice giver. And I'm curious if in your own coaching experience, that is your reflection with the people that you're working with.
I think so. I will say that as someone who's growing in my coaching skills, we all have to get used to sitting in this place of discomfort, because sitting in that place as the one holding the mirror can be uncomfortable as well. When
Tell me
you're
why.
sitting,
I'm curious your experience.
Yeah, because I feel like even through technology, right, we are able to be empaths and take on that, especially when we've come through our own personal growth journey, right? We're
Yeah,
all the time growing and remembering and changing. So it requires being a coach catalyzes my own personal growth because
100%.
yeah. And on top of just the business aspects, being a coach, the same questions I'm asking of others, I might not be thinking of it myself during that, but as I reflect back on my coaching session, I'm thinking about those same questions in my
Yes,
life.
absolutely.
And
It deepens your own personal growth journey 100%. When you have a quality of integrity in how you approach people and you're genuinely trying to support people, then the things that come out of your mouth go into your brain as you are having a conflict with someone or feeling angsty or you fill in the blank, but it reflects in your own life. And it's actually, again, it's like another invitation to a personal growth journey that you may or may not realize is what you were invited to. I think we subconsciously want that journey or we wouldn't be going down this path, just like homeschooling.
yeah, I'm having to figure out how to budget that into my emotional and mental energy as well.
Yes.
'Cause it might be an hour-long coaching session, but yeah, I'm gonna mull on that afterwards and not just immediately afterwards. Throughout the week, things are gonna come up that jog my memory from that conversation. And if depending on how many clients you're working with, that's a lot of thinking. A
That is
lot
a
of
lot of thinking.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that is my experience. But I mean, 3 of my 4 kids are grown and my 4th is almost graduated, so I have a different bandwidth than I would have had at your phase of parenting for sure. But I find it really is I wish I knew what I know now, that the experiences that I shared initially on my blog or in my book, that those really were universal stories. Because I have people left and right that speak to me and say, "Thank you for sharing that. That was really vulnerable. And I appreciate you sharing that because it helps me to feel normal or that I'm just like everybody else." And I'm telling you, if nothing resonates on this episode, then probably you aren't normal because this is unusual to not identify with some of these struggles. But if you identify with it, just know that everyone around you is experiencing it in some form or some way, even if we don't quite understand their story. I
Yes,
rem
I think sometimes I feel like my role is often to say the things that no one else is wanting to say.
yes.
And not in a place of wanting to stir a pot or cause dissension,
Yeah,
but just to be honest, like you
yeah,
said, about what's going on in my life. And if someone else can just say, "Oh, I'm not alone in that," then
yes.
that's worth it.
I actually have learned how to interrupt, and because we get into our own stories, and we, in some ways, are just grateful that someone is sitting there with us to listen to us. But we are accustomed to being in that story, and we're not actually moving away from the story. It's because it's comfortable, we stay with it. But we actually need to move away from whatever story we've created so that we can get to the what's the next step? What is it that your gut says or your heart says that you should do next? And I've learned to be an interrupter, which may or may not be useful in home, but I'm careful with it at home. But it also has encouraged me to be a coach at home more than the traditional role of a mother. But I find that role of interrupting and asking the curious question. I'm curious. I haven't heard you speak to dot or tell me more about this thing that you said. I don't know what's in somebody's mind. I have no idea what they're about to say. Even when it's my husband, who I probably know more than any person on the planet, I don't always know what he's going to say, but I do have a spider sense when someone isn't saying something, or they started to say something, but then they shifted away. And that right there is a powerful coaching tool just to get curious with the person in front of you. And having someone honestly go into those spaces with you, someone that does not know you, that isn't in your neighborhood, that has no skin in the game in your family or in your community, is a really useful tool to feel seen and heard and understood.
It really is because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we're not saying. Even just, I
What we're
remember
not
you
saying, yeah.
reflecting. you reflecting some of my actual words back to me, not
Yeah.
saying anything else, right?
Yeah.
But just saying, you just said, then repeating that back and then actually hearing my own words and thinking about that has been very helpful.
That actually reminds me of something that we talked about before the conversation was recorded, that because I have older kids, how do you deal with conflict? Or would you be able to frame the question again? Because it actually relates to this moment.
Yeah, I was just thinking as my kids get older, certainly just to backtrack a little bit more from that, a lot of how we handle conflict as moms has to do with, again, how we are just taking in that sensory information. And
Yeah.
conflict is more often than not a loud thing. I would say most of the time, especially with our children who are comfortable with us. And it can be a lot for moms like myself who are easily overstimulated by
Yeah.
auditory. And so we're already coming into things kind of with our hackles raised just because of the sensory input.
Yes.
On top of that, we have all the emotions and all the thoughts that are coming as well. And as my kids are getting older, the conflicts are looking different. It's not just about who grabbed my toy or who had it first anymore.
Yeah.
It's, more personal things. Yeah, any wisdom from Teresa who's a step ahead would be so helpful.
So, what you just spoke to right before I asked you to clarify the question is one of the tools that we've learned in our family. In fact, over the last month or two, I've been promoting the workshop on a relationship reset and building nonviolent communication tools into our homes because that's where we started. It first started with my husband and I, and then we obviously filtered it into the way we were approaching our kids. And as our conversation you and I here spoke to, when we're coaching, we have an opportunity to use whatever we use in coaching in our families. And sure enough, on the very same day, I had written and posted about nonviolent communication in our homeschools. I had a conflict with my son, of course. And this spoiler alert, conflict doesn't disappear just because you actually learn how to do it in a healthier way. But I had an opportunity to use that nonviolent communication, and in a nutshell, I would say that there's 4 steps to it, and it's gonna feel really intuitive if you practice it, because all it is acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging what the needs are beneath the feelings, and acknowledging or making a request for someone to address that feeling. But the first thing is to actually observe the behavior. So you notice what's going on for someone and you say, "Hey, so I see that, I don't know, you fill in the blank. You slammed your hands against the desk when you started your math workbook. And that is the observation. It isn't, why are you slamming your hands on the desk? Stop doing that. You're disturbing everyone. You frightened me." Although that has been my default. But instead, observe and then ask about the feelings. So, how are you feeling? Or you stating your feeling, if it's you that needs to express your feeling. Then get curious for yourself. What is the need underneath that? And then make a request to have that need addressed. So, I bring that up because obviously you can hear that entire framework is beneficial for your relationship with your partner, but it is definitely beneficial for your adolescents or the kids that are growing up. And how you know they're adolescent is when they start saying no, or I don't want to do it that way. I have a different way of thinking about things, or I don't know, some sort of resistance. That's when you know that they're individuating. Just
Yeah.
assume it. If they're 7, great. Great. I don't know about great. But anyway, it is what it is. But you move toward that framework because it helps them to get clear on what they need, what they feel, and to make requests. And on the same day that I started writing a couple of weeks ago, I had that conflict with my teenage son. And before I even said something to him about, okay, so I noticed that. Would you tell me how you're feeling? He jumped in and said, okay, I'll tell you how I'm feeling and what I need. And I was like,
That's wonderful. So you've already started to internalize that. I speak a little bit about that with just declarative language when we're
right.
talking about understanding just I notice or I wonder. those sorts of things, actually just stating, especially when it comes to senses that are internal, that
Yes.
kids might struggle with because they're not visible, like our interoception and other things. It's hard to we often jump straight to that emotion,
Yes.
and kids aren't ready, or adult often, especially if we're in that moment of fight or flight, we're just not
Yes.
ready. We go straight there.
I actually released a YouTube video in the last few weeks about how to stay sane as a homeschool mom of teenagers. And it does actually address a lot of the things that I would speak to, but I do think it's valuable for us as moms to recognize that though we can use a framework to address both our partners and our kids are not motivated or they're not invested in the relationship with us like our partner is, or at least gotta hope, gotta hope they are. But we assume that the partner is. We don't assume that the child is. So the child might not go with you and want to smooth out a conflict. They might just actually be feeling a lot of feelings. And as you and I both know, there's a brainstorm that happens during adolescence, and kids simply don't have the prefrontal cortex available to them the same way that we might. And even we are humans, so we don't always either. We're dealing with trauma, or we're dealing with highly sensitive, or we're dealing with sensory processing challenges, or just we feel overwhelmed by certain things. And kids at that phase are even more challenged by it. And so I would say, recognize your reality. This is not just your mini adult, even your oldest child, because that's always the one that we want to make a mini adult out of. And they are also not a mini adult. They are humans that are going through this brainstorm. And so we have to be honest with what their capacity is. And I don't know about you, but that time audit conversation ties into this, at least it did for me, because all I knew is that I was supposed to do certain things, I was supposed to do certain things as an effective, successful home educator. And so we were going to do it on a timeline, but we were going to do more than actually was reasonable. And everybody was going to just like fall in line and find what they need before we leave home and get to the place on time, even though they needed help. And there was just one unrealistic expectation after the other. And there was no margins for them just being kids.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so much. And I feel like we are, as homeschool moms, we are in the prime place to work on developing those skills that you're talking about. And yet, they're the things that really get shoved to the wayside because
Yeah.
there are too many other things that we deem as more important, or we're not willing to do the inner work ourselves to be able to go there with our kids.
Yep, and I don't think we have a choice. My thought is you either actually determine to figure out what you need to do to grow, and if those aren't typically the words that we use, we're just like, "Okay, what is gonna work?" We have to move toward personal growth, or else we will just become so frustrated and resentful, and we either go through the motions and the kids will know it, or else we'll send them to school or try to find some out.
Right? And see, here's the
Uh,
thing, even if we send them to school, we're still moms.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
it's worth it.
Yes, it absolutely is. So your site talks about sensory smart self-care. Could you share just 2 or 3 examples, either tools or routines or mindset shifts that really changed how you care for yourself in overstimulating moments?
So I think a great place to start is starting with that crisis moment because we often are just stuck in this cycle of reactivity and we don't know what to do when we get there. We just say things or do things that we end up regretting
Yeah.
immediately. And we spend the rest of the day in recovery mode. So if we know that regardless of the support systems that we have in place, regardless of the self care, we're still going to have those moments. Hopefully, they'll be less frequent, then I think a great place to start is actually working on your plan for when that happens. What can you do in that moment to support yourself? Whether it's staying there with your kid or whether you are able to communicate what's going on and step away. And then what sensory supports do you do in those 3 or 4 minutes that you might have before things go crazy in the other and those are usually things that are gonna tap into those senses that we talked about earlier that are actually understimulated. So, it could be instead of going straight to the deep breathing, it could be something like using your muscles against resistance.
Yeah.
So, I love pulling or pushing against a countertop in the bathroom because now that my kids are older, they do finally understand mom closes the door when I go to the
Yeah.
bathroom. It doesn't mean they don't bother me through the door, but
No.
I do actually get to keep the door closed. So yes, tapping into it's called proprioception by doing pushing, pulling, lifting. And you don't have to have anything special for that, right? Because we are going to have our body weight. So I do that while I step aside. And it's also important to communicate to our kids what's going on. So that's something that I have in the reset strategy as well, is working on a super simple one sentence script to tell your child what's going on and that you'll be right back so
Right.
that you
Yeah.
set them up to understand and that you are going to be coming back. And when you do come back, that's another part of the plan is figuring out how to reconcile with your child if you've said something or done something that
Mhm.
maybe you shouldn't have said or done because you're human too. So having a chance to show yourself grace in that moment and afterwards.
That's so beautiful. That probably subconsciously my husband he'd come home after 36 hours of an emerge shift or something crazy, and he would go exercise. And I'd be like, don't you need to sleep? And no, I need to burn this off. I didn't
Yes.
get that. I do now. And in fact, I probably should have done the exact thing before our
If you
conversation.
got
It would have
home.
been it's true, I really should have, and I will after the conversation,
That's something that we talk
explicit.
about as well is that stress cycle. There's really about 7 ways that you can complete the stress cycle, but that's one of them. In his case, he had that adrenaline and he was running on it and he needed it
Yeah.
to complete his job and do it well. And we as homeschool moms get our own shots of adrenaline throughout the day for various reasons. And
Yes.
we need to discharge that. And it could be exercise, it could
Yeah.
be laughing, it could be crying, it could be so many different
Talking
things.
to a friend. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
being
actually
intentional
jumping on
about
the trampoline is a great one. Just
yes, yes, it
mom.
is.
Yeah.
That's great. And it doesn't even have to be a giant one. It could be like the little in-home rebounders that are coming back in popularity now.
Yeah, the life of a graduated homeschool mom. I have a trampoline that took my kids years to save for, and we actually said, "I think we need you to do that because my husband's in a merge." So we were like, "And there is not gonna be a trampoline here." They finally gathered the money, and then they left home. So it's me that uses the trampoline and also my very large dog.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to see that, Teresa.
Yeah, it is very funny. You said your relationship I remember early on, you said your relationship with your daughter was deeply affected by how you made shifts for yourself toward I use the word self-compassion, but I don't think that's what you used, but in how you were relating to yourself. I think that speaks to this conversation as well. Are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that this child in particular is the one that really needed a lot of these tools and was just shut off to even considering them. And just seeing how it helped me in my own life show up as a more present and regulated mom for her helped her be open to considering that maybe it's not so bad after all.
Yes.
If mom can be 38 years old and need support, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with
Yes.
needing support in this way. So even just having the terminology describing myself with different words to help her understand regulation and what that meant in my life made her more open to it. And especially just understanding, I think we've talked a lot about how our own journeys, and it tends to be the child that's so similar to us that can also be so hard to relate to. So it's been very healing for me as well, just thinking back about my own childhood and very healing working with her through similar situations and seeing her experience, I would say, a sense of pride and how she's able to handle and show up and be successful through those things that would be so challenging for me dealing with those same
Beautiful.
things.
It's so healing. I haven't spoken to this recently on the podcast, but there is another mode or a different approach to engaging in coaching or therapy, and it is called internal family systems and treating the different parts of us as separate, almost children inside of us. And when we are intentionally coaching or developing a healthier relationship with the people in our family and they're younger, we are in a way mirroring the relationship that we had with ourselves when we were younger. So it's very, very much healing work. And so, yes, this homeschool mom thing does invite challenge, but it
Yeah.
also invites opportunity.
I think so many kids who would benefit from understanding self-regulation
Mm,
can tend to be kids who are demand avoidant. And so when we come at them with all of these things that are supposed to fix the problem for them,
yeah.
there's going to be automatic pushback.
Yeah.
So, how we help people develop these skills has to necessarily look different. I wish I could take all of my beautiful training as an OT and all of these expensive continuing education courses and lay them before my child and say, you should really trust me. I have all the stuff, but it doesn't work that way, does it?
Do you know, Whitney, I'm on the other end of this now. So I have a kiddo who's not a kiddo anymore, and she works with me. And so she does a lot of the developing, or she does the graphic design, but I've got all these things that I've been creating for the workshops and all of the workbooks and like varying tools that can be used alongside the workshop, but for homeschool moms to deal with their relationships or their emotions or to release themselves from unhelpful school mindsets. And she's working through them as she is putting them on paper. And she's like, "Oh, mom, this is gold. This is so good." And I'm like, "Oh, so intriguing for me that you are on the receiving end of the personal work that I've done. And also now you're reading the stuff that I believe is the most important, the most important things." And so I am actually on the side of being able to see that my kids are really using that. So it's really wild. I feel like I was in your space yesterday, and now I see my kids growing up and really using these things, which is a sign I'm old. But it also is very gratifying to see this happen.
Can imagine. Yeah. That's very heartwarming to hear and encouraging. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I am very pleased to still be in this space because, and this is the thing that I wish I could tell every mom, it doesn't matter what your scenario is right now. There is nothing new under the sun. Everyone has experienced it, possibly people that you're rubbing shoulders with, but they're too busy or occupied or scared to be vulnerable. And yet everybody's stories have a lot of overlap. We have a lot of challenges. But when we own what really is going on in our homes or in our hearts, when we're being honest with ourselves, that's step one to moving away from the challenging stuff. And it is very possible to move toward, piecing all the different elements that seem challenging, piecing them all together and making a much more beautiful puzzle. And it certainly has been my experience, and I know it's been your experience. And it has been such a delight chatting with you today. I would like to hear where we can find you on your podcast, on your website, and what you're planning to do with the work that you're doing in the next few years.
So you can find me at sensationalmoms.com and on social media and the podcast, all under the same name. So easy to find there. And you can also find some nice free resources if you're interested in coming up with that 3-step plan for actually how to go through those overwhelming moments. And you can find that for free up on the website as well. I love coaching moms one on one. And so that is my focus. But I also offer workshops.
Yeah.
And I look forward to extending into some book groups and group coaching sessions as things continue to grow. Coaching one on one is really my passion, and just getting the word out about our nervous system and what sensory based self care can do for any mom. And it can really transform the relationships in the home.
Beautiful. So for the mom listening who feels overstimulated right now, or as you said, touched out, talked out, what's the next step for them to move forward? What would you want for them to hear? What is their next step for their journey?
I would love for you to contact me for your free consultation so that you can understand how coaching works and you can see how understanding your unique nervous system needs and really just the whole puzzle piece. I would call it the nervous system of the whole family, right? How everyone underneath the household can work in harmony. So many times underneath the same household, we all have such different needs. So figuring out how to make that work, how to fit those puzzle pieces together is hard. Fortunately, I love a good puzzle and we can figure those things out together in practical, really just doable steps for your home.
Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Teresa.